All right. Hello, everyone. Demetrius Jelatis here. And with me, we've got back Mr. Engel. How you doing, Jesse?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me back.
Yes. Well, appreciate the comments from our last podcast. You know, you've made Jesse feel very welcome, very safe. So we appreciate that. So fortunately, he's being willing to continue to play a role. So what do we have this week? We are going to take some listener questions about handling fatigue during tournaments. We are going to take a good question about best advice for players at different levels. And we're going to hear that from both my perspective and from Jesse's. And then we're going to have our conversation topic is going to be kind of a little bit about pool ethics and some interesting situations and some interesting debates that come up about some of the different topics in competitive pool. And so that's what we'll talk about from there. And then we're, of course, going to kick off a road story at some point. In fact, I'm probably going to open with it. But first, I've got to call everyone's attention. I got to plug MN Pool Boot Camp. So if you aren't familiar with this, as your first podcast, I teach pool in a kind of a cool way. I do 3-day pool boot camps. And by doing 3 days, it's not a traditional lesson where somebody comes and, you know, you look at their game and you twist their stance around, or you give them a different bridge, or you show them a drill and wish them well. It's like, no, we do more of a comprehensive, like, you know, I get to know you, your background, where you've come from, where you're at, where you're trying to get. We look at some of the things that have worked or haven't worked. We looked at how much you play, how much you compete, what your resources are to put in. And I watch you play and hit balls and see where you're strong and where you're struggling. And then we just kind of mind meld, and I kind of get in your shoes, and I have 3 days to just share your journey and say, hey, what are some things that we could do with the resources you have and the opportunities you have to build on your strengths, you know, add some, you know, shore up some weaknesses, put together a game that can take you where you want to go. What works really well is that it's not just me showing some stuff and wishing you well with it. By having 3 days together, we actually do the stuff side by side so that you can actually see growth. And by the time you leave, you should be playing a different level of game, as well as having a pretty clear idea of what to continue to keep going. So it's just full service side by side with a pretty passionate and serious player. So because it's 3 days, the other cool part is regardless of where you live, I'm in Minnesota, but most of, 80, 90% of the people that work with me fly here. I pick them up at the airport. They stay at my house. So just trying to, I've got booked into the beginning part of 2022. I've got one opening in February at this moment, a couple in March. And so if you're starting to take a look at what your 2022 looks like for pool, give me a shout. I'm at mnpoolbootcamp.com. MN is for Minnesota. So mnpoolbootcamp.com. All right. And thanks to all those that have reached out. I've had a lot of people reach out, and it's been a great 2021. And it's been a lot of fun. So thank you for making that possible. So, all right, Jesse, why don't we start off with a listener question? Someone, was kind of new to playing some, a lot of tournaments run pretty aggressive schedules. And, it's not uncommon to play real late at night and play matches all day. It's tiring. And I don't know about you, but I don't play as well when I'm really, really tired as I do when I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So what advice would you have for someone that wants to know how to handle that in a tournament?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. For me, I always found that there was definitely different levels of that. There was a point of no return where, like we have local tournaments like MPA tournaments. So I remember playing some of those until, must have been like 4 a.m, where when you're playing, or I guess when you're awake for like 16, 18 hours, you start to like really hit a wall. No matter, caffeine's not going to help. I mean, personally, I'm not a player who's using the other stuff, but I know that might be a common thing in pool. But yeah, I mean, so when you hit that spot, the only thing I could recommend when you're that tired is, really just try to slow down and like make sure that you're still making like solid fundamental decisions. Because I know that you can get very lazy when the fatigue starts to kick in. And then, there's like just the general like late nights or, yeah, you're not like feeling super alert. Same advice. The only other thing I would add is that, if you're a very social person that's like in between matches, you're always catching up with the other players or whatever, depending on where your tournament's at, I would probably dial down from that a little bit more and just go like find a spot to chill. If you like to listen to some music, I don't know, throw on like a podcast or whatever, but anything to just not burn up unnecessary energy. I mean, I know talking doesn't seem like it would, but if you're engaged in conversation, you can definitely, just my opinion, you can use up too much unnecessary energy. So that's the best I got for you.
Is that why you never talked to me at the tournaments? We drove together, man. You just stonewalled me. Why you got to be that way?
Well, that's part of it too. Like, for me, I've always found that if I'm not like, engaged in like serious conversation at all moments, like it's just a lot easier to stay like in the zone. And that, that does carry over into, every other match, right? So I like to just kind of keep to myself for the most part and not like really, throw off the momentum of how I'm doing the tournament. But yeah,
and one thing that I learned from you, and I think that you kind of told me the first part of your answer. I remember asking you this question a few years ago, and you told me that you just have to you told me kind of to slow down and be a little bit deliberate with my decisions and with my execution. I'm not sure if those were your exact words, but that was that's how I interpreted it. And one thing that I've seen happen for me is that when I'm really, really tired, I can break down in ways that are very surprising, in ways that I didn't think I could break down. I can miss balls that I didn't think I could miss. I'm worried about playing shape, or I'm thinking about the next shot, and all of a sudden, I hear the sound of a ball rattling, and I'm like, how did that ball not go in? Where I just take my eye off the ball, or I take things for granted. And I've learned that when I'm really tired, I have to not take anything for granted. I mean, that's probably always good advice, but like when I'm really tired, I have to just go shot by shot and really rely on those processes, make a good decision, pick my shot, connect, and then just treat each single shot like it's important, because I can't just freewheel around the table when I'm super tired. It's just stuff that starts going sideways. So maybe there's some other people that are the opposite, which is they're like rhythm players, and maybe they use a lot of rhythm to flow through. But for me, I have to treat each shot like it's missable, even more than normal.
Yeah, and one more thing I'll add is not to go on much of a tangent, but personal belief, I do think that breathing is a very critical part in your consistency with pool. And especially as you get, more tired, I do believe that you can maybe be a little bit lazier there, or, not focusing on like keeping that consistent thing. So I would say when I get tired, I definitely walk around the table more. And while I'm doing that, I make sure to like take some deep breaths and make sure that feels consistent as I'm breathing. And that sort of all like wraps into it.
Yeah, and probably a good dose of oxygen kind of helps in those spots. The other thing I was going to mention is that I like when Jesse was saying, just find something quiet, pop in a podcast. One thing that I really like is, I have my headphones with my cell phone, and whether I have just a few minutes or whatever I have any time between matches, I like kind of either ducking out in my car, or if I don't have a lot of time and I just want to sit down in a chair, I might just listen to something that's really, and for me, I think something that quiets your mind can really be good. So like I have a personalized hypnosis recording that I went to a hypnotist for 5 sessions. And the 5th session, they did a personalized recording for me. That was really, really cool. And when I listen to that, it's really, really refreshing, to where when I come back out, it's like my mind has just kind of come to a still, refreshed, present, calm. And I just feel like I just took a really good power nap. And at times when I feel like I'm just overtired, where you're so tired you can't even get tired, or when you're under pressure and your mind is spinning and it just feels like it's not still and calm, and you just feel like the idea that you're going to close your eyes is almost impossible. That type of guided visualization is really good. So I can't share the hypnosis thing I've got, but one that I really like that's on YouTube. If you go to Neil Steyan, Neil Steyan has a FEIJEN. If you look up his channel, he's got a visualization exercise that's probably like 16 minutes long. And so that might be a good one if you want to cue that one up and listen to it between matches late at night. I think that you might find that being very refreshing. So just if you have the time, use the time. If you don't, you don't.
Yeah, another side note to that too. Like I do happen to know that he's worked a lot with that Elliott Rowe. Are you familiar with him?
No.
So I know that he was. I don't know if any other pool players from Europe have worked with him, but he's like basically a professional mindset coach. I know he's worked with some of the top poker players in the world. Like he's very, very good at what he does. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, maybe look into some of his material as well.
Yeah, and Neil Spann has like that mental game course that you can work through as well. He sells that, so check out his channel. Neil Spann is pretty awesome. So, all right. So now let's hope that you're not all tired right now. Okay. What's our next thing? So let's liven it up. I'm going to tell a little story. We're gonna skip ahead. We're gonna tell a funny. This is just something that happened tonight that was kind of fun. So Jesse Engel came over, and we were gonna do this podcast, but we wanted to hit a few balls. So we decided. I think I called the format. I said, what we're gonna do, we're gonna play the 10-ball ghost, 2 races to 4, and if we happen to split sets, we're gonna play a shootout against the ghost, like one of those Predator events. We wanted the excitement, for the fans, the ghost fans. So we didn't really get off to a rocket start, did we, Jesse?
Yeah,
kind of
across the finish line. We hit a few bumpy roads. But.
Yeah, so we started off with the first race to 4, and I think we lost 4-1, and I was not performing that well, and things were kind of going sideways, and we were snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. So we went down in flames, and we're down 4-0. So we lost the first set. So then the second set was much, much worse. We were down 3-0. And I don't know, man. It's a funny game. You'd think that, anyway, it's just funny how quick it can happen when you're just making mistakes and a little off. And, anyway, so then we're down 3-0. And of course, if we had just lost 4-0, then we would not be discussing this on the podcast. So here's what happens is we come back and win 4 in a row. Like a boss. And then we get to the playoff. Now, how do you do a shootout against the 10-ball ghost? Well, here's how you do it is you set up the shot, and I flipped a coin to see if the ghost shot at the spot of that challenge shot first, or if we did. For those that don't know, in this format, if it goes one set apiece, then the sudden death tiebreak is you take 4 shots from the kitchen, shooting a ball that's like where the money ball's racked, like 3 inches beyond the spot. So anyway, what we decided was that the ghost would have a 75% chance of making each shot. So we'd flip both coins. And if it came up heads, then the ghost misses. If not, if there's at least one tail, then the ghost makes its shot. So we flip to see who shoots first, us or the ghost. The ghost goes first. We flip the coins. There's a tail. So we're down 1-0. But I let Jesse kick us off. And Jesse, you swish the first shot, bringing us to 1-1. With 3 more shots each to go. So I flip the coins for the ghost, and wouldn't you know it, it comes up heads, and we're up. Look at that. Now we're in the driver's seat. The ghost choked under the pressure. So I get up and I make my shot. So now we're up 2-1 with 2 shots to go. The ghost, I flip the coins, and it comes up heads again. We are running good. You know what? I think the pressure of us both making our shot influence the coins, I'm sure. Okay, so I'll cut to the chase. So the ghost dogs it. So now all has to happen is if Jesse makes his next shot, we win. If not, it might come down to me in the end. And Jesse started talking about how he was going to miss on purpose just to put the heat on me. And I don't know if he was joking or not, but he missed. And next thing you know, the ghost flips a tail. And now it's 2-2, and I've got the last chance. If I make this ball, we win. If not, we go to the sudden death where we're even back further from like a diamond off the end rail. And I think I was negotiating that we would give the ghost a 50-50 chance on that shot. But everything slowed down, and I saw the edge of the ball, and the pockets looked as big as Minnesota Fats' pants. And I'm trying to think of all the cliches. I was in the zone. I could see the measles on the cue ball. And anyway, I put the thing down, and we win. So we won against the ghost in the sudden death format. So anyway, this is what we do for fun around the Jelatis household. I don't know. Maybe I should edit that out, but no, I won't. I won't. You guys get stuck. I'm sticking you guys with it. So that's my fun story for the day. That was a fun comeback. We were as down as you could be. So all right. So now that we've livened things up for the audience, let's have a conversation about general tips for pool improvement at different levels. So we're going to look at 4 different levels. We're going to talk about Fargo rate 400, 500, 600, and 701. We're going to talk about those 4 different levels. So, Jesse, you've never seen this person play. All you know about them is that they're a 400 Fargo. What do you think they need to do to try to get to the next level? What should they prioritize from here?
Okay, sure. So 400, that's a little bit tricky because I'm trying to, put some player in that category that I might know. I don't know exactly what that speed truly is. So I guess what I would say is pretty much back to like basics where, you're just making sure that you have a general idea of where the cue ball's heading from your next shot. Quite honestly, your pattern choice at that skill level is not going to be, at the highest level. So you're going to make a lot of mistakes there. But I do think more importantly at that level is that you're really paying attention to where the cue ball is going after you're hitting the ball and kind of learning that way. I mean, that's.
No, I 100% agree. So I think that what I think of is I tend to see that people have generally they can improve their stroke, their tip accuracy, and their knowledge of where the cue ball is going using the vertical axis, using above center, below center on the cue ball. So what that means is I've seen a lot of people that kind of slug the balls in with center ballish type hits where their tip accuracy isn't the best. And I call it like they have like a directional sense. Like they understand if they cut the ball to the left, the cue ball is going to go to the right. They might have an idea that if it's going up table or bouncing across table, they might have an idea if it's going to go a long way or not so far. But they don't really have, it's not very accurate. So, but one of the reasons it's not very accurate is because their tip isn't very accurate because they've been mostly just pocketing balls with, center ball, a little bit below, a little bit above. And so for these people, I really think trying to improve tip accuracy. And there's, so if I was to suggest a drill, there's a fun one I like where you just set up a straight in shot. You practice shooting stop shots, follow shots, draw shots, and then the kind of in between follow where you do like the stun run through where you shoot like you want to shoot all these at the same speed. You're not varying your speed. So like if you wanted to shoot a draw shot, whatever speed you're going to use for that draw shot, use that speed for your follow shot and just lift your tip high. And then shoot a stop shot with the same speed. And then when you want to use your stun run through where your cue ball just dribbles forward like a foot or two, use the same swing speed and just crawl your tip up a half of tip above center. And then the final one is like kind of like a punch draw where you don't have like a zippy draw where you just kind of maybe like a half tip below center with a nice confident swing and let the cue ball just kind of dribble its way back a diamond or two. And so anyway, if anybody's interested in seeing an example of that drill, if you have questions on how to do it, just email me info@mnpoolbootcamp.com. But I think that's a good one to start learning how to get your tip accurate. From there, the other drill I'd recommend once you have those hits is going to like the wagon wheel. And the wagon wheel is a drill. You can find it on YouTube if you look up the wagon wheel, where you basically set up a slight cut shot and you practice maneuvering your cue ball on the tangent line, forward of the tangent line, and back of the tangent line, just by blending swing speed, tip, and your aim, cheating the pocket a little bit on the object ball to get kind of used to directing the cue ball on different lines, fudging the tangent line, things like this. So I think that working on tip accuracy and a calm swing, and kind of like Jesse said, learning where that cue ball is going to go using those techniques. I think that's pretty critical.
Yeah, sums it up pretty well.
Good. So now, congratulations. Now you're 500. You got all that stuff going smooth. Jesse, what next?
500. So we're talking about like the 500 pushing up towards like.
Yeah, 540, 550, okay. Sure.
So in that range, what I would say is obviously you've already paid attention to the beginning stuff that we mentioned for the 400s. I would say when you get to 500, now is when you really need to start paying attention to what's going wrong with your pattern play, why you keep laying yourself in the same jam. So if you're playing 8-ball, in the last couple balls, why you're leaving yourself a very tough shot with, like the pattern is supposed to get easier. that's the most common thing I see with players that's skill level. I mean, of course, there is a lot of things to do with fundamentals and a couple other things that I plan on mentioning when we get to the higher levels that you can better fine tune because you've already improved your other more obvious skills, I would say. So for the 500s, I think I'm just going to stick with mainly pattern play. And I guess we can mix in a little bit of, like a more consistent and efficient swing speed, because a lot of players should be kind of graduated from the idea of just that one, like you said, kind of hard punch hit. Or if you come from the camp of being a ball roller, like by now you should have understood that, there's a very efficient speed to be hitting balls at, where you don't have to use, a ton of swing speed, but you can get, the same action on the balls with a relatively consistent range of speeds.
Yeah, you use, good timing, meaning a soft moving cue that accelerates with good timing. And still get nice, crisp, lively action without really moving the cue too fast or any sudden movement. So, okay, so for my thought on a 500, from what I've seen, right around 500, there's still too many open misses. So pocketing, of course, is still something that has to get tighter. So I like a few. There's that's just practice, right? Time at the table. But the other part is I've noticed that most all the way up to like 540, 550 players, they don't use enough side spin. Now it's interesting because Jesse was talking about 8-ball patterns. So if you're playing bar table 8-ball, you can work around side spin quite a bit at that level by selecting patterns that don't require it. So like pattern play is just assembling the cue ball tools that you have into it's like a puzzle. You look at the table, you see, what cue ball maneuvers that and then you look at how you assemble those cue ball maneuvers to run through that table. And so when you don't have side spin and you're using center ball cue ball maneuvers, but if you've done the wagon wheels and you've done the 5-hit drills and you've learned how to draw your ball and stun your ball around, you can kind of like still play 8-ball with kind of that starter skill set, just because 8-ball allows you to pick a pattern so you can kind of bend the pattern to your shots, but some of the time, but then not all of the time. And when you play 9-ball, or when you have more complex patterns, or you have breakouts, or you have racks where you have to do a lot of movement or maneuver around blocker balls, that's where these types of players really start struggling. And I feel like one of the reasons why is because they're playing more of a center ball toolbox, which is good for short distances. Side spin only takes effect when you hit a rail. So therefore side spins usually, your side spin maneuvers tend to be multiple rails, moving your cue ball up and down table. Your center ball maneuvers tend to be holding the cue ball and maneuvering at short distances with accuracy. And so I call it the short game. And I think most of 8-ball is the short game. But when you're looking at trying to get better, you've got to develop the long game, which usually involves multiple rails and side spin. So that's why I think that most 500 players and 550 players, a lot of them have bad luck. They've missed too many balls because of deflection. They never really got comfortable with it. They just decided to work around it. Usually they say stuff like, oh, well, the good players stay one tip away from center. What do you think of that advice, Jesse? When people say good players stay one tip away from center, what's your reaction?
I would say which good players, because I don't ever see those people make it to the end of the tournament.
Yeah, I completely disagree. I think every top player I know is like comfortable on the stratosphere, up high and off to the sides of the ball, and just like Filipinos, even like the Europeans that are playing pretty ABC patterns, they spin the ball. Buddy Hall, Mr. Stay one tip away from center. I watch him play. He's on the edge of the ball. So I think that that's just an excuse people buy into because they've missed too many balls because of deflection. You have to learn the deflection of your shaft.
Yeah. Like amazing players can make it seem that way because where they're trying to get their cue ball is so accurate that they hardly ever need to use like 2 tips outside for recovery shots. I mean, unless the pattern, makes it where that has to happen. But on the bar table level, like bar table 8-ball with like wide open racks, I feel like I can play that game, pretty controlled, where it probably looks like I hardly ever hit outside of center ball. But for the most part, no, that's kind of like,
But when you're playing 9-ball, like,
yeah, you just have to be able to use,
Yeah.
all the tips English. So.
and what I say is, some people that are afraid of it, and I'll move on, but there's a lot of people in this camp. And even the people that use side spin probably don't use it as extreme as I do or as often as I do. So I don't like mixing. People say, well, side spin makes the shot harder. Well, there's other things that make the shot harder. Distance and power make the shot harder. And so I don't like to mix all three. Like, I rarely shoot with extreme side spin from like table length away on a difficult shot with a lot of power. Like, I usually don't mix all of those. But if I'm sitting close to a ball and it's a fairly easy ball to pocket, and I'm using like a soft to medium speed, then I expect myself to have full range of side spin options available without really impacting my make percentage. So set up routine shots and learn to hit them with all types of spin. And so if you're just learning, there's, you can just set up a shot and spot it again and again and again. It just work around the clock. Just try it with 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, see where it goes, get used to making it. Or yeah. So anyway, okay, I'll move on. I've been talking about that for too long. All right. So now what I've noticed is that the 600 players, they have most of the stun shots. They have most of the side spin shots. They have most of the tools. They can pocket balls pretty well. I mean, 600, I'll tell you, that's a heck of a player. How do you get better from there, Jesse?
600. This is, when you discuss maybe talking about these different level of players, this was the one level where I think this is probably the biggest thing you can do to improve. And you really need to, I'm not going to say slow down your game to the point where you're like painfully slow, but the majority of players in the 600 range that I know don't have a consistent tempo of how they play their game. They try to get into these, I guess in quote marks, rhythms where they want to be like not necessarily fast and loose, but they just feel like they're trying to catch their gear as it's come to be going. And
I'm nodding. You can't see me, but I'm nodding.
Yeah, and by now, like, you have a lot of the tools that you should be able to put racks together and be a very, solid, consistent player. But that's just got to be the one thing that stands out is like the overall tempo of play. And I mean, this, Demi, because you've seen me play a ton of times, and anybody who's maybe like watched videos of me play online, like I am definitely more analytical, methodical with how I approach the game. So you'll probably catch me walking around the table more than most people that you know. But the reason why I did that is because I realized that a lot of my errors were not coming from the lack of the knowledge or knowing exactly how to, hit the ball. And like I could feel it. I could visualize in my head, but I just wasn't consistent across the board with everything. My pre-shot routine was not, as consistent as it needed to be. So part of that process for me when I was around that skill range was to start slowing down and like taking a better look at the table and reanalyzing how I was going to run the rest of the pattern, like after every shot or two, just to make sure that I wasn't like already giving myself the win 8 balls ahead of time or whatever it is. Maybe it's a bad analogy, but just overall, like slowing down and making sure that your focus level is still as high as it can be and not making any silly mental errors. So
this one's interesting. So I think I agree with the underlying tone. So but there's a difference between speed versus consistency and certain checkpoints. So let's just suppose, for example, that there is a few checkpoints you have to make on every shot. You have to figure out what the pattern you're going to play is, where you need to be, what the pitfalls are, what your best percentage is to avoid those, visualize and commit to a shot, and then address the ball, take a breath, and kind of like shift into execution mode. Whatever. I'm not saying you have to do all those like deliberately or consciously, but let's just say that there is 5 things that have to happen in every shot. Well, if you do those 5 things sometimes and not every time, and then sometimes you go fast and sometimes you go slow and sometimes you cut corners, then that's not going to go very well. If you do those 5 things on every shot at the same pace, then even if your pace is fairly quick, it doesn't look rushed and reckless. It just looks like quicker. But so I think that I don't know that it's necessarily about slowing down in terms of actual number of seconds at the table. I think what it's about is finding the rhythm where you knock out those things to do on every shot. So like, think about it this way. When you're playing your best, what does it look like? how do you go through that checklist and what does that rhythm look like? And then holding yourself to continuing to play at that rhythm and continuing to go through that checklist on a routine and making it very consistent. So that's the way I would interpret what Jesse's saying, because I know some people like to play a little quicker, and I don't know that I've seen this play out where it's not always about number of seconds at the table. It's about going through and completing that checklist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, this is why it's easier to be on your podcast. Just why I wouldn't run my own. I sometimes don't explain things exactly the way that I'm thinking about them. I mean, yeah, you definitely nailed it there. It doesn't really matter like if you're taking 20 seconds shot or 45. It's more so just make sure you're going through the steps that you need to you give yourself the best chance for the end result there. So if you're a football team, you're going to use all 4 of your huddles for 4 downs. Don't use one huddle and then just kind of wing it from there.
Yeah. So what I've seen, and so I have a saying, maybe I've shared this on the podcast before, but I like to say it: bad players treat the game like it's easy and make it hard, and that good players treat the game like it's hard and keep it easy. What I've seen is when players get into that 586, 620 range, I've seen exactly like what Jesse said, where people want to just kind of like run the table over and freewheel. Like I see a lot of freewheeling, run the table over, because in this zone, people tend to be, they have all the shots, they know all the shots. And when they're feeling good and they're comfortable and they're in their rhythm and they're relaxed and, they can make them. And so then they can run 2, 3, 4 racks. And it's like, and so they just want to get up and like find that zone where everything goes in and they just kind of whack them all in. But what I've seen is that pattern play is what's lacking, because it's almost like I watched the way most of these players play, and there's just, they all want to be consistent. They all, they can run 3, 4 racks. They're like, how do I do it consistently? But I watch how they're going about it. I'm like, you can't do what you're doing right now consistently. There's nobody that can make all those shots consistently. The only way to get better is to play tighter cue ball and patterns to where you're not forced to come with that many recovery shots and difficult to pocket balls and difficult to execute long draws and, crazy shots. And it's like, so, but the problem is most people don't want to do that. They just want to freewheel around the table, run the table over, and then they just want to practice until they can just do that and make them all the time. And so at some point you're going to have to make a choice. Do you want to get better, even if it's at the cost of like learning a little bit more discipline? And basically you get to like, I like to say it this way, like when you're playing patterns, it's like you're playing scotch doubles with yourself. When you have the planner and you have the shooter. And I'm like, when you shoot, you have to shoot like you don't care about position. But when you plan, you have to plan like your shooting partner can't shoot at all. You have to plan like, instead of thinking, I'll just get somewhere because I'm so good, I'll figure it out. Like that is not a good mind. I think that's the mindset. If I could put what are these people thinking? I feel like they're thinking, I'm good. If I get over there, I'll just hit it that way. And if I hit it there, I can just spin it over there and I'll just pound it back there. And I mean, I'm a good enough player. Even if I have to bank, I can always bank the ball. No big deal. I just don't think that's how top players think. Top players think like, I would hate to put myself there because I might not be able to make it. And if I've saddled myself with a bank shot, that's doggable. And I don't want to take that chance. How can I avoid those risks and just keep it, keep things from going wrong? How do I keep the door from cracking open that things could go wrong? And so it takes a little bit of humility, and you have to treat the game like it's hard and then learn to make it easier and more consistent. And so that's a long route of saying, I think it's about pattern play. And I think it's about being a little bit more humble and not just that, hey, I can play really good and know all the shots. It's like, no, let's plan as if you don't know all the shots and then try to shoot like you do. That's my advice. And that's actually one of my niches. So for people in that 500-600 range, these are some of my favorite students because I feel like I'm capable of taking a 600 freewheeling guy that can run a lot of racks some days, but not other days. These people that make, they knock out a name player out of their local tournament and then make the money, but then just aren't steady enough to get to the pressure and the adversity of the last few rounds. Like that's my sweet spot. So give me a shout.
Oh yeah. The last thing I'm going to add to that is, because I know we're going to step up to 700 next. The other addition to that is a lot of people, when they're around that 600 range, they've probably gotten there because they've been playing pretty consistently. And what happens is when you get to that skill level, you maybe haven't kind of ever step back and really taking a closer look at your fundamentals. So there is the pre-shot routine that's very, very important. But stroke, this is where I would say if you're right in that 600 range, you should really take a look at your stroke compared to some of the top professionals that have like really pure strokes. I mean, there's dozens of them out there now that hit the balls right. I mean,
we're a couple of your favorites.
Okay, so like obviously American wise, like Tyler Steyer probably hits the balls as clean as you can. I mean, pretty close. Maybe he's not the best player in the world, but his fundamentals are great. That Kachi, I don't know how you pronounce his first name, like it's very pure. I've noticed that Alex hits the balls pretty well too. Like it's hard to debate that many people hit them more pure than that. Guys like that, where it's not slow, but it's just efficient. The timing's there, and you can clearly tell that they're not having to do much extra work on almost any of their shots. So you won't be able to change that overnight, but at least comparing like your tempo, timing, and just overall delivery compared to what those guys are, who probably have a similar like body build to you, like with wingspan, because that does play into it a little bit. I would say you really need to figure out how you're going to get from where you're at as close as you can to mimicking that, because that's going to be a huge part of how you're going to be able to get, if you do plan on getting close to 700, that's the large difference between like a guy who's low 700s to 750, 770, 780 is just the ability to deliver that cue that much better.
Yeah, one of my favorites is Saming Chen. I think her technique is just amazing. So okay, great. So now is the 700. Yeah, it's tough. It starts getting real tough to get better. What would you say to somebody that plays 700 that wants to see improvement at this stage in their career?
Yeah. Well, we've mentioned a lot of things. I would say if you're just tapping over the 700 mark, probably the best way for you to get better from here is to just fly here and play me $500 sets. No, I'm just kidding. All right. No, if you're right around 700, like it's, oh man, dude. Okay. You probably, I mean, there is still a range of differences there with where your knowledge is at, but I'm going to assume that most players who are over 700 have a pretty good idea of how the table works. Like there's not too many pattern theories or things about that cue ball that they really don't quite understand at this point. Maybe some very specific shots, but overall you should have a good sense of it. So again, it's probably just going back and figuring out where your leaks are in your game. When do you fail mid game or what gets you into trouble, and fine tuning those areas. I mean, that just seems like the best thing it can offer. I mean, there's no specific one thing at that level. I mean, you could say that at this point, now you're dealing with much higher level of play typically. So yes, there's things like the whole part of like the kicking game, like that's extremely important at this level, and that does make a world of difference. At anybody that's up above 700, like that makes a huge difference, because giving up ball in hand, or this day and age, getting a hit but leaving a long shot where the cue ball 6 inches off the rail, it's almost like giving up ball in hand to the top players. So you may as well just kind of give up the game from there. But yeah, that's really important. So that's the best I got, man. You just kind of have to kind of run back through all your areas of your game and make sure you're fine tuning everything. So
yeah, I think that what's challenging is it's very individual. Like I know 700. In fact, I would only debate one thing is I think 700 still play bad patterns. I shouldn't say bad, but not optimal. I think there's still a lot of room for pattern improvement. I have yet to see a 700 player that does not surprise me with how often they make the game difficult for themselves. So I think there's room to improve patterns. In fact, I had a guy come here a few weeks ago from Canada that was around a 700, and he I think the time we spent together he was pretty excited about it. He didn't, he's very knowledgeable, and I think he was surprised by what he was able to pick up from working with me. So I do think that pattern play is still a thing, but it's not as large of a issue. It's not as obvious. Now but then again, just man, even any improvement when you're at 700, 20 points is almost a life's work at that point. So, it's just a big deal. So, and then what Jesse says about kicking and safeties, obviously improving percentages, fundamentals and striking could still be a thing. I know that my fundamentals aren't as good as I'd like them. And when I was 700, they certainly weren't all that strong. And so different 700s might have different leaks, the break shot, but I'd say this. So you kind of like what Jesse said, you kind of have to know your game. But the ultimate thing that I really believe is you've got to compete against really, really strong players. And so it's very funny because when Jesse was talking about coming here and playing him sets, he was obviously joking. It was very funny, but like actually, they probably should come here and play you $500 sets. And then it's like really, really, really important because here's what I think. If you're a 700 and you're playing local tournaments where you're like as good as anyone in the tournament, it's just not going to drive you to make those improvements. And when it comes to like, well, where do you need to get better? When you're trying to look at your game and say, well, where do I need to improve? You look at your game and you don't really need to improve because you're playing other people at a similar or lower level. So when you hold your game up, it's like, well, what are you comparing it to? You're comparing your game to other people's similar games, and nothing really leaks off the page. You're like, I could be a little bit better at this trick shot, or maybe I need to work on my long banks or something. But man, I'll tell you this: you go to that Predator event and start playing these Polish champions, you'll see real clear all of a sudden that your game is not. It's not at the finished. It's not a finished product, and so, that's an experience that you don't get. And I, necessity is the mother of invention. If you don't put your game in a spot where it's not good enough and it's insufficient, and it's breaking down, then you won't see those leaks and you won't feel the need to close those gaps. Just kind of be like in a wish spot where it's like, yeah, I'd like to get better. It'd be cool if I was a little bit better at some of these things, but it's pretty good versus just getting your nose, your teeth kicked in and your nose open and be like, man, I can't keep going if I don't improve in these areas, and I need to find a way. And I'm staring at people that do this way better than me, and I need to be like that. I just think that it takes competition. So if I had to draw a line, I'd say like 640, 650, maybe 620 to 650. I feel like you can get to 620 to 650 without heavy competition. I feel like you can do that playing leagues, playing in your basement, kind of doing drills, watching videos, taking some lessons, whatever. I think you can get up to 600 and a little bit beyond. Once you're at 650, 660 to 700, it's really, really hard to get better if you're not fairly regularly playing better players. So I just think you have to be competing. And Jesse Engel, he's here for you.
So I do want to add one thing here.
Agree with that or no?
Yeah, no, I do agree. Yeah, I was just I was already thinking about what I wanted to add to this. So I'm gonna be a sort of a plug for Demi here. And I know I'm biased because we're friends, but this is one thing that I've noticed when it comes to like just teaching pool in general or any of the content that's out there for instruction. Like, this is the reason why I don't teach pool, is that I have all the knowledge clearly. I have the skill set, but I definitely can't structure it in a way that's individual for different types of players. I mean, if people come up and ask me questions about 1 or 2 or 3 shots, I can explain it to them. I can execute it 10 times in a row and show it exactly why it works. But there's something else that you have to have in place there for teaching. And this is why I think that you probably do so well with your students, is that when people come in, you're able to kind of, well, I mean, I'm laughing because I'm like, I was going to say, Jesse, very good. You sounded like you're actually saying this, like you're not even reading off the cards I'm giving you. Yeah. So like when people come to you,
I totally start,
So when people come to you though, you're able to identify like not only where they're, but you could probably estimate their Fargo rate without them telling you prior or ever looking it up, just by like kind of working with them for a few hours. I mean, you'd have a pretty close range there, right?
The funny part is I could talk to somebody on the phone for 10 minutes, ask them a few questions, and I could usually be within 20 points just by doing a quick 5-minute interview by the phone.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, so that's one thing that I think makes you like extremely unique in this category. And I mean, the main reason, like, obviously it's a nice plug for you, push people towards you. But what I will say is that if people are listening and you want to take this game seriously and you want to take the path of, or not the hard path of just trying to figure out everything by yourself, definitely consider that as opposed to maybe going to like a local, even some of the top players that might charge you 50, 75, 100 an hour to work with them, because it may seem like you have to, I mean, I don't know what exactly you charge, but my whole point is like, if there is a financial difference there, or the idea of traveling here, that's such an added benefit that I think people undervalue. Because if the person teaching you can't really identify all the leaks in your game early on and form a very good game plan on how are you going to get from point A to point B, you're just going to like spend so much wasted time treading water while your coach tries to learn how to coach you. So I don't know if that was said the best way, but I think you'll probably be able to kind of recap that in a better way. But I know that there's a lot of merit to that when it comes to learning skills. So,
well, I'll just say thank you. And I believe, I'm very, I believe heavily in what I do. And yeah, I don't want to turn this into an infomercial. So I'll just say thank you. And yeah, I feel very confident that there's a lot of people that are can show you something or tell you to work on this or tell you to try to do that. But I feel like, I'll give you one example, is like when people talk about, staying away from side pockets, top players, they try not to overuse side pockets. They try to play for the corners. Like, this is a kind of a cliche, but the thing is that there's like a lot of types of cliche advice in pool that people can tell you. And then you can not really understand why that is or how it fits into the game, or if that's really what the biggest thing is right now. I just feel like there's a lot of things that when you work with an instructor, they might show you something or tell you something that's like a valuable nugget, but like it's one piece of a puzzle. And so it's like, I think that what I do is I look at where somebody is, where they want to go, what they've been working on. And I feel like what separates me is I can prioritize and figure out which pieces are next and how do they need to put them together. Whereas I feel like a lot of instructors are just kind of shoveling pieces randomly and saying, here's a piece, good luck. Anyway, so that's what I'd say. So.
Yeah. So again, that's just my personal opinion. Like I said, I mean, I know we're friends, but I've seen enough of the content out there to know that I mean, I can back that up. So
cool.
Yeah. So if you happen to head to Demi, not that he's doing this for me, but please use promo code Jesse. Okay, that's enough.
That's
all right, we'll move on.
We're tracking you. All right, so let's have a little fun. We're having a good time. We're getting our second Mountain Dew going. We're going to catch a gear. So what I wanted to talk about now was, let's see. So there was a post on Easy Billiards. This is where it all starts. It starts with a post on Easy Billiards where the question was, should professional players call foul on themselves? And I've seen this comes up like every 6 months. So I've probably seen 20 iterations of this in the last 10 years. And it's not the answer. Okay, so let's just start by this, Jesse. Should professional players call foul on themselves?
Okay, so without adding any other side thing to that, my first view of that is 100% always call the foul on yourself. To give a quick example of this, like, I remember you were there, so you'll be able to like remember what the mood was like. I was playing Shane at the US Bar Table Championships in like what was the semifinal in the 8-ball. And I remember this is like the first time this has happened to me in probably 5 years. I was like thinking about what I wanted to do, if I wanted to roll forward 3 inches or just kind of like stun off to the right. And I get down on my practice strokes and my tip just ever so slightly nudged the cue ball to the point where the cue ball did not move, but I definitely felt that I made contact. And all I did was, like, you probably remember the moment better than I did. All I did in my head is just like, I did the whole like heart fake thing. I stood up and I just kind of looked with a blank stare for like 2 seconds. And then I looked over at Shane and just kind of, gave him the arm wave, like, yep, I followed. And like, he gave me this look where he was like he was puzzled, like what was going on. And then he figured out, oh, you must have fouled somehow.
Shane must have been like, oh, you must have bet on me on the side.
Yeah, so And like to this day, like I don't know if you look back and watch that match, I don't know if anybody would have been able to see any movement. I don't know if anybody else in the not to make myself sound like some saint of a human being, but what I just know is that in almost every single case, like that's like it's just the right thing to do, man. Like it just takes away from the integrity of the game if you don't do that. And let's take out the whole point of like karma. It's just not good. Like just game integrity is so big, and you just don't do it.
But speaking of karma, later in the match, he was down 4-3 against Shane, going to 5. And Jesse runs down to the 8 ball and half hooks himself where he can't quite shoot the 8 in the corner. And he calls a 3-rail bank for the 8 in the corner. And so it's like a 1-pocket bank, a 3-railer. Shane's got all his balls open. So he's Shane's on the hill. Jesse's shooting a 3-railer. He kind of just died that he's half hooked. And he shoots this 3-railer, and the 8 ball hits the first rail, the second rail, and the third rail, and goes right in the center of the hole. And then he breaks and runs out of the hill like a boss. And I'll tell you something. So Jesse ends up winning that match. And I'll tell you the funniest thing. I've probably watched this like 30 times on YouTube. So it's on YouTube. You can look it up. Jesse Engel, Shane Van Boning. My favorite part is that when the ball leaves the third rail, Shane is sitting in line of the camera, and he's sitting right behind the line from that point on the rail into the pocket. So Shane is actually the first person to know whether that ball is heading towards the corner. And if you watch his face, like Shane kind of like body leaning over to see what's happening. And if you watch his face as that 8 ball leaves the third rail and starts tracking towards the corner, the look of disgust that overtakes it, he's just like, the stuff I have to put up with, man. That's what Shane was. You could just see Shane's was just like, oh, of course it's going to go in. Anyway, I probably watched his expression like that. And I like Shane, I'm a big fan. Trust me, I'm a big fan. But when I've got half a Jesse Engel in the 8 ball tournament, then I like Jesse more at that moment. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. So anyway, karma.
Good karma. But yeah, so back to the original question. Just off the top of my head, it would be hard to find a time that I would consider the idea of not calling a foul on myself at where I'm at in my life. Like maybe when I was younger, I might have tried to or been able to justify a reason of why, if they didn't see it, whatever, when I was a little bit less mature mentally. But overall, anybody out there that ever has that type of thought, you don't have to take my word for it, but please do.
Okay.
Just call the foul yourself.
So the reason I find this one interesting is because that's where I am today. So 2021, I call foul on myself, no questions asked, no big deal. When I was a kid, the difference was that I grew up in the pool hall in the 90s, where I can't speak for everywhere in the 90s. I didn't play on the road. But in the pool hall I grew up in, nobody called foul on themselves. And it wasn't that now this is where it gets weird. We weren't like a bunch of scumbags. It's just the way that we played. It was like kind of like house rules. I guess you could say it was like house rules, where back when I was playing in the 90s, we watched each other play, and it was the responsibility of the opponent to call foul. So if you bumped a cue ball, or if you didn't get a rail, the rules in my pool hall, the rules were, if somebody asked you, did you bump that ball? Did you get a rail? Was that a foul? You had to, like, you always answered honestly. Like, nope, no rail, it's a foul. But you didn't volunteer that. You waited until they called it. And I'm not saying that this was right. I'm not saying, but I do think this is interesting. So, but that's just the way everybody played it. So here's the interesting question. If everybody played it that way, is it wrong?
Well, yeah, I mean, this type of conversation could go, again, it could go on and you could come up with different justifications. I just don't think it's that complicated. I think it's just taking a personal responsibility that, back to the game integrity thing, it's just the way it needs to be. It's not about what those other people are doing, or, well, everybody's doing this, and then it's fine. It is what it is. Like when you're the last person driving your town at midnight and you come up to the stoplight, do you stop, or do you just see that, well, there's no other headlights within a mile, I'm just going to run right through this because I'm clearly not going to cause an accident? But no, it's like you stop and you wait for the lights to turn green. Like it's the same kind of concept. I know it's not about cheating or not cheating, but it's just there's reasons why there's rules of the game in place, and you just follow the rules.
So this is okay. So this is where I think it's really interesting, because this is, by the way, Jesse represents the vast majority, the vast majority. Okay. So I have a very unpopular minority opinion. However, my opinion is not that I don't call fouls on myself, because I do. But let me explain. The reason that I call fouls on myself is because in 2021, in today's day and age, there is a cultural expectation among pool players that we are to call fouls on ourselves. So because it is a social expectation, then I play by that. So I consider this a social norm, meaning it is a social agreement that we all have that we're going to call foul on ourselves. And so then I will follow that norm. However, where I disagree with Jesse is he was using examples that there's rules and we have to follow those rules. But what I'm saying, Jesse, is what if the rules were that your opponent's job is to play the role of the referee? So this was a very, very hard leap for a lot of people on Easy Billiards. They really struggled with this. And a lot of people just kept coming back to, well, if you do something that's against the rules and they're supposed to get ball in hand, if you don't give them ball in hand, then you're breaking the rules, and that's low integrity. I'm like, no, what if the rules were it's your opponent's responsibility to call foul and play the role of the ref? Then you're not breaking the rules. It's just different rules.
Yeah. So on that specific point, I would say, again, to me, what that sounds like on the surface is that you're trying to leave yourself an opening to be able to, like, as like a cop out, to justify dropping your personal accountability to maintain the game integrity. That's just where I see it. It's like, yes, your opponent should have to call the foul, right? But if they, okay, it's like if you, this is a scenario that does come up in pool, okay? You go up to the ball and you're gonna like slow one rail kick at a ball, and when you walk past it, you very clear as day see that it's a frozen ball, okay? But it's a shot that's set up where when you're gonna kick at that one rail, you and your opponent are both knowledgeable enough players where they could probably see why you'd want to hit it pretty hard, and it might be a valid shot. So they really don't know what you're doing. And yes, the correct move there would be they should probably ask, hey, are you going to just slow roll or leg at this ball or slow roll? And then you kind of handle it from there. But they don't really know what's going on in your mind either. They might not want to mess with your momentum. So then you decide to go up and you slow roll the ball, right? And of course, it does the standard half like double kiss where the cue ball doesn't hit the rail after. And then now they say, like, oh, I probably should have checked if that ball's frozen if I would have known you were going to do that. Like, what do you do there? Do you then say, like, oh yeah, like I just never thought I would hit it that bad? Like, there's so many ways that you could like take a route to like kind of cop out there and get yourself out of handing over the foul. Or if they just kind of do like the side, you just know why they're doing it. It's like, no, what I do in those scenarios now, like now more than ever, is when I walk past, if I know it's frozen, and I know that I'm going to do a hit that could end up being controversial, I just be like, hey, by the way, it is frozen. Or if I know that it's a slight bit off, I just say, just so you know, it's off the rail. And then that opens up for them to go take a look. So there's no argument after. That's just the best way to handle it. And I feel like a lot of these situations can be avoided if you don't have any part of that mindset that is, well, I might be able to kind of get into a gray area that might turn out in my favor here.
So here's what I think is really interesting. So Jesse, we don't have to agree with this at all. I'll just tell you, my view is I find that people they're so stuck in one paradigm that they can't see beyond it. I just feel like deep down, you're like, it's wrong not to call foul on yourself. So then even if we have a culture where even if the rules say that it was your opponent's job and everybody else thinks it's your opponent's job, but you're still doing it wrong though, because you're supposed to be doing it this other way. So it's like, I'm trying to conjure up a hypothetical world in which the rule book says it's your opponent's responsibility, which nobody else calls foul on themselves, and which everyone else expects that it's their responsibility to do so. And even in that hypothetical world, you're like, yeah, but that's not the right way to play. That's not the right way to do it. You got to do it the right way. And so like the only thing I can kind of compare it to would be like, there's places where people consider safeties like dirty pool, right? Like there's bars where if you play defense, they're like, well, what are you're cheating. You got to go for that pocket. And so like there's different ways of playing the game. And So like if you're playing in a bar where everybody in that bar tries to honest effort every single shot and nobody ever plays a deliberate safety, then if you play a safety and if they all call you like you act like you're a cheater and you're low integrity, who's right? Are you low integrity because you played a safe? Because and the, it's their own fault that everyone disagrees with you in this bar because they're all just really stupid, or is it you that is a failure and you are playing low integrity because you're playing in a different cultural norm, and so in that environment you're being low integrity? So is playing a safe when if you're playing where nobody else is playing safe and they all consider that cheating, is playing a safe low integrity? What are your thoughts?
Okay, yeah. So this is like a tangent where I can maybe hop a little bit over the other side. There used to be a tournament when I lived down in Florida for about a year where it was on like, I want to say, yeah, it was on 8-footers. Like I don't remember but it was these goofy 8-footers with like tight pockets and springy rails. And it was just a race to one Friday night tournament. The only reason like all the decent players played is they had a pretty juicy break pot. But this was a really interesting rule they had where it was 8-ball, but it was best effort 8-ball. So yeah, strange thing. So you always had to be shooting at a ball. And if they like, basically if they caught you to the point where it was like, oh, like that you didn't really give yourself a true chance to make a ball there, then you were in a jam. And I never thought that this would come up, but it was such a strange situation because I got in the spot where I left myself up table, and I knew that if I like basically the spot shot that you do at the shootouts for it was like that kind of shot. And I knew that the cue ball was coming 2 rails back towards the same side but opposite corner, right? So like the Jason Class scratch. Well, so the two rail the corner scratch, and if as long as the cue ball got up there, it was going to give me a shot on the 8-ball almost like straight into the side, right? But if I scratched, they also had a rule where if you got ball in hand, you didn't get true ball in hand. You had to play it behind the line. And if your ball was behind the line, you had to kick at it. So my opponent had 1 ball left, which was just behind the line. So I knew if I scratched, he was going to be in a much worse position than he was if I didn't scratch and hooked it, right? So like it was a huge bonus to scratch on that shot. So I went for the ball, but I intentionally shot it in the way that gave me the speed to best scratch, knowing that if I missed the ball, I was going to get him in a tough spot. So I ended up making the ball. It slow roll legged in and it scratched. And then he was like, well, like that's where he was like, well, you didn't even try to avoid the scratch. Like he tried to call like a technicality there. And I'm like, well, I mean, what do you want me to say? I made the ball. So that was like one time where you could maybe argue that, yeah, maybe I did something. Like it was, I guess if you want to say it was slightly shady, then it was. But like I took the highest percentage within the rule without breaking the rule.
I will just share. I found myself in a similar spot one time. We were playing a tournament up at Jimmy's Pro Billiards. We were playing one of those chip tournaments, like the ring chip tournaments. And so we had 6 players per table. You put chips up at every table, then you play. Whoever wins gets the pot of chips, and then the antes go up, the blinds go up, and eventually people get busted out, and the 4 tables consolidate to 1 table. And anyway, I ended up making it to the finals, and I ended up playing another guy in the finals that you know quite well. And anyway, then the funniest part is that it's a heads-up race to 11. But for some reason, and it's I've won 2 ring game like type tournaments like this, so maybe I'm mixing them up. But anyway, there was a ring game tournament I played where I got to the finals, and they were like, it was like ring game rules. Like you had the honest effort and everything. And if you missed the ball, then they could either take it or pass it back. And it was like they basically continued to play ring game rules even when we got heads up, which is like really, really, really weird. It's like to play honest effort, like ring game.
Yeah.
It's like the whole reason to go like honest effort in a ring game, for those that don't know, is that when you're playing with a group of people, there's no reason to ever play defense because you go and then there's 5 other players that are going to take a turn playing a good defensive shot. All you're doing is helping the guy 2 players behind you. So it's not going to really matter. But when you're playing heads up, to sit there and say, well, just honest effort, go for everything. But then to sit there and act like, well, okay, I can go for this where if I miss it hangs, or I can go for it where if I miss, I leave you table length behind balls. You know what I mean? It's like to sit there and try to like deny that you understand where the balls are likely to end up if you miss. It's a really hard thing to do. So anyway, it's kind of funny, but the point is, who's okay? Just answer. Yeah, go. You were kind of using this to answer my question. My question to you was: in a bar where nobody plays safe, would you consider it cheating to play a safety? If everyone else considers it cheating to play a safety.
So is it? I guess my question to that is it the bar rule, or is it just like that's just how they play the game in Sheboygan County?
So you just got the whole pool room where everybody, like, anytime, like, you already know it because, like, they're talking about, like, this guy last week came in and, I mean, we told him you got to go for your ball, and he kept on doing this thing where he didn't even go for his ball, and he was just rolled up behind something. We had we're not letting him play in here again. That guy, we don't want to play with him. That guy's terrible agile. What a cheater. And everyone's agreeing and, like, mobbing the memory of the guy, and then you're sitting there. So, like, in that type of environment, like, assuming you're not worried for your physical safety or anything. So I'll just tell you my opinion. I think in that situation, it would be pretty low integrity to play a safety. Right. I think that these guys aren't playing safe on you. It's pretty clear that if you want to play in this environment, that there's an expectation, a social norm, if you will, that this is how the game is going to be played. And if you want to play in that environment, I think you should adapt to that environment and play in a way that's going to be consistent with I think you have to adapt your ethics to the situation that you're in.
Fair. And what I would say to that is, in that exact situation, this is how I would handle it. I agree. I would not just play like blatant safeties to like be that guy. But for specific situation, I mean, if you're playing rotation, it's a little bit different for the most part.
They just play 8-ball.
They just play 8-ball. Okay. So if they play 8-ball, here's a perfect scenario. Let's say your cue ball's in a position where you have very similar shots on one of your last two balls, and then the 8-ball is just like hanging in the corner. Like, I, in 100% of the time there, am going to choose the shot that has a higher percentage to leave him with a worse shot. So that's like you're sort of playing a two-way shot safe without really doing that.
I think what you're saying is you're going to make an honest effort on every shot if that's the expectation, but you might decide which shot to make your honest effort on based on your knowledge of how the cue ball works and all these things. Like, that's totally reasonable. I think that's a reasonable compromise.
Yeah.
But what you're not going to do is like roll up behind a ball, just wedge him like Mickey Mouse behind the 3-ball, just like ha ha ha. You're not going to do that.
Yeah, I think that would be.
Okay, so let me ask you another one. This one, I didn't have this example prepared, but now because I'm thinking about this bar room. Now I feel like I got to give this bar room a name. We should call it, Bob's Side Pocket. So anyway, while we're playing at Bob's Side Pocket, if the cue ball lands near a rail, they're allowed to move it a ball width off the rail. If the cue ball freezes to the rail and they got to shoot, they're allowed to move it off the bumper because they don't want to have to shoot off the wall. So anytime they lay it against the wall, they get to move it off the wall and shoot from there. So now you're playing and your cue ball freezes to the rail. Do you move it off the wall?
Well, I mean, if that's the rule, I guess I'd pull up my putter and call spacies and move it away from the brick.
Yeah. So okay. So this is my point.
Funny.
So this is my point. So you're saying, I just want to be clear. I feel like I'm some trial lawyer here. All right, Mr. Johnson. So what you're saying, you just acknowledged that you would pick up the cue ball with your hand, move it 3 inches, and then shoot from where it lay. Now, in anywhere else, that would be considered a foul.
Sure.
And if you did that in a game, okay, now think about this.
Because then you could get yourself hooked just out of being hooked. Yes,
there's a lot of cool things you can do. But the point is this: is so if somebody had a video of you playing a money match, and the cue ball froze on the rail, and then your opponent was like ordering a drink, and you like moved it off the rail 3 inches and shot, everybody would be like, this guy is the biggest cheater in the world. But yet, in the right environment, it wouldn't be cheating if that's the way the game plays.
Okay, that's totally fair. Okay. So if that's their bar rule, they're like, if you're within the bumper or whatever, the butt end of the cue, like you can move it that far away directly from the rail where it is. Like, if that's the rule, I mean, even being like my skill level, like, of course, if it's going to benefit me to use that tournament rule, I'm going to use that tournament rule, right?
Yes.
Now, that's, to me, that's way different. That's way different than having a close hit where it's like almost can be a split hit. The second, like, you get there, by the way the cue ball reacts, being a knowledgeable player, that you hit the opponent's ball first, and then they're like, oh, well, that was pretty close, probably would have been too close to call. But you deep down know, like,
No, not really, because the cue ball went left and then it went right away. Like that can't happen with the law of physics. If I hit my ball first, then in my opinion, you're just bad for not calling a foul on yourself in that scenario. When you get into all these like little finicky rules, yeah, I mean that's that's tricky. You can play percentages.
The reason I bring it up, I believe it is a social norm. And I believe that right now, so many people are so stuck in the. I mean, it's fine. I'm totally fine with this, by the way. I've got no problem with calling foul on yourself. I'll do it. That's what I do. That's what everyone does now. My whole point is that I don't think that it's necessary. Like the pool hall I grew up with, everybody was expected to call foul on your opponent. And it was like they taught me when I was like 12 or 13, you don't call foul. If somebody calls foul, you tell them. If they don't, that's on them. And that's the way everybody played. So was everybody in that pool hall completely cheater pants unethical, or was that just kind of a house rules? That's how we played back then, you know? I don't really understand how that's unethical if that's the understanding and everyone's playing the same way. It's nobody's cheating. Those are just the rules. You know what I mean? That's just the rules that we're playing by. So I'll tell you where it gets interesting, right? And we don't have to agree. I just find it interesting that people are just. So I said I think it's a social norm. Then one person on AZ Billiards was like kind of telling me like even if everyone plays that way, it's still wrong. Even if everyone accepts it, even if everyone's okay with it, it doesn't make it right. And so I spent the better part of a day, like I didn't just snap reply to the guy. I thought about this all day last week. I had a day where I was just thinking about this. And I was like, what other standard for right is there other than what everybody does and accepts and agrees to? Like I was thinking about, and now I'm not a philosopher. I'm not like some debate person or some logic, philosophy guy. So I'm not here to like really go down some weird rabbit hole, but like, it just seems like that's what right and wrong really is that when a bunch of people get together and say, hey, this is right, this is wrong. Like outside of that, like if everybody gets together and says, hey, this is how we play, this is right, then how can it really be wrong? I'm like, what makes something wrong if it's not a group of people deciding it's wrong? And the only other thing I could come up with would be like some religious thing where it's like, hey, God says this is wrong, but I don't think that's going to weigh in on how we regulate our pool games. So like, I just don't know, like by definition to me, it seems like for something to be wrong, there has to be people judging it as wrong. And if all the judging people agree that it's okay, what makes it wrong? I don't understand.
Totally fair. I mean, my opinion now where I'm at is that I think there's some scenarios that can come up where that concept is something that you have to like overlook still and really just figure out your own personal answer. So for me, yeah, it's like, is it wrong to, if you're in a weekly tournament, right? And you're clearly the best. I mean, if you're in a weekly tournament, you're probably gonna be the best player there, unless you're like
you're playing with me. Yeah, I know. I see where you're going with that.
No, like a few areas of the country. Yeah. But like if they're all beginners, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's like if you shoot a shot where like the cue ball is like a millimeter away from the object ball, and you're just in a dead jam, but it's like straight in up in the corner, and the only way to get down the ball on the end rail, on the opposite end rail, is just to level cue it, know you're going to double hit, and get down there, right? Now, to most players, they're going to be like, that guy made the ball, he was so close, and he got down table. Like, not most players. Most beginners will not have a clue at why that can't work, right? And they won't even, they're so clueless that they don't even know that they should even ask about a foul, because they might not even know that there can even be a double hit foul. They don't even understand that, right? So if you do that, and then all the guys in there that are kind of like,
they start clapping.
Yeah, like people are clapping, right? Yeah. And then there's 5 other players who know that there is a such thing as a double hit foul, but maybe just don't know. And they're like, you're doing great. Like even if it was, it's like whatever, you just hit it, you do it. They tell you that, and nobody's there to tell you that like that's just wrong to do. That's just bad for game integrity. Then at what point, even if 100 people are like, yeah, no, that's if you're gonna get away with it, it's just you got to do it. At what point do you, like, maybe not about losing sleep, at what point do you just say, you know what, like this is just where I'm gonna like draw the line. Like I'm not gonna do this because I don't believe that this is good for game integrity.
Okay, so I think that, of course, with today's culture, that would be horrible. If if, and I have to stretch my own mind because it's such a weird hypothetical, but if the culture truly was, it's your opponent's job to call foul. And that's just how you're raised. And that's what you're taught is right. And there's actually a reason to do it that way. There's actually a reason to do it that way. I'll get into it in a second. But if that's just like, hey, it's your opponent's job. And if they're not paying attention, and if they're on their cell phone, or if they're watching the birds outside or whatever, like that's a mistake by your opponent. Not a foul by you. It's a mistake by your opponent. It's like them hanging a ball. Well, if in that world, if you shove through the ball and they don't know that that's a foul, they don't even know to call foul there, then you would just take that and consider it a skill edge. The same way that if you played a safety and they didn't know what the right return was,
Sure.
then you would just consider that I get ball in hand because they just missed the ball because they didn't understand that there was an easier kick. That's a skill edge. And you would just consider that a skill edge that I've developed knowledge that they don't have. And that's part of my skill edge.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's right. I'm just, by today's standards, that's horribly wrong. But in the hypothetical world, then you can't use, that's the whole point is we can't. So I was talking about social norms, like a lot of things have changed, right? There's a lot of things that we don't do today that we used to do 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago in our country. And if we look 200 years in the future, there's a lot of things we do today that might not be okay. I don't know if everyone's vegetarian and eating animals is considered like, travesty that we have animals, raised and slaughtered for meat when we have alternatives or, whatever. I could probably think of like 10 other things that like, using technology that's being built by people in third world countries that are like working unlivable conditions so that we can have shiny new stuff. And it's like, we might look back and say, this was unconscionably bad. This is not okay. But the point is, I just think there's social norms. And so we do the best we can. But okay, and so I just think that these things shift and change, and that you have to look at the I guess my point about like the people that don't play safeties and all these different things is you kind of have to look at the culture and the expectation. I think that what sets that. So my whole thing is like, I call foul on myself. I got no problem with calling foul on myself. I think it's the right thing to do in today's day and age. I just didn't like the idea that it's like, it's not, to me, it wasn't like white and black where it's like all good people always call foul and to do it any other way would always be horribly wrong. It's like, yeah, I think it's more context and shifting context and cultural, expectation. That's anyway. So we don't have to agree, but that's kind of where I landed on the thing.
Yeah. That's fair. Sorry. So I was thinking, I guess maybe a final like wrap up note with that is, I just think there's some things in life where, again, well, it's kind of the same thing I already said, but like I've learned a lot with the way I've lived my life, mistakes I've made, like other just life choices, and something that I have landed on it, and like I'm going to be set on this now, is that there is like times that are going to come up in your life where you sort of have to like pretend as if like you can get away with it. Nobody knows. Nobody's ever going to know. And are you going to regret just playing that way and knowing that you can, whether it be pool or life in general, right? Like this is just kind of where I stand. Like it's just better. I mean, it's just going to lead to like an overall better society if that's the way you want to be, right? If you want to try to be like a good person for the world, then these are the types of moments. I mean, it sounds stupid because we're talking about a game of pool, but like I think that this is something that can, this carries over into all other areas in life, and this probably like is not something that people could follow, but I mean, I just think this is what ends up leading to all the world's problems, like for the most part, because you have a bunch of people who like kind of create their own little, like, okay, their little lines, like when it starts in pool, right? But then what does it go to? Then it goes to like the next year of life, and then you just
okay, listen, I'm gonna interrupt. I don't disagree. Like I believe, what was the Gandhi quote? Like, keep your thoughts positive because your thoughts become your words, and keep your words positive because your words become your behavior. Keep your behavior positive. Your behavior becomes your habits. Your habits become your destiny. Or your values, and your values become your destiny. Something like that. So it's like, obviously what you are is you're built up of a bunch of small decisions, and the habits and the values of the character you set moment by moment builds into something big. And the part that I think that we can move on, because I feel that there's a disconnect where the whole idea that you should do what's right even when no one's watching, and that those little small things matter, and you need to stick to your integrity. I agree with that. I just don't think it's a given that there's only one way for integrity to be translated in pool, and that is to always to call foul on yourself. That's the only way that integrity could be expressed in any culture. Because I grew up in a different culture where there was high integrity. Now, on the other hand, I've also seen a lot of things. Like I've seen a pastor that I grew up playing 9-ball with and straight pool with. He thought it was he would not take a foul. He considered it unethical or immoral to take a foul. He's like, the rules say, you have to hit the lowest ball or you have to hit a rail, and if you don't, that's a foul, and that that's bad. Like there's a and I was like, well, yeah, but it's a strategy thing. You take a foul, it's a penalty. You pay the penalty. It's a strategic penalty. And he's like, yeah, but that means that you didn't make a legal shot. And as a good person, I believe that you should attempt to play within the rules. The rules say you need to hit a rail. Yes, there's a penalty for not following the rules, but the rules say you're supposed to hit a rail, so I'm going to hit a rail. And so he always played that way. And I beat his brains out, but it's like, because I'd take fouls and he wouldn't. But I always thought that was really weird. And so I guess my whole point is that, and there's a lot of things too, man. There's a lot of other things like that. Now, the one argument for not calling foul on yourself is that, let's just suppose you have 100 people in the tournament and 50 of them are willing to call foul on themselves and 50 of the people aren't. If the expectation is you call foul on yourself, then the 50 people that have low integrity have an advantage over the 50 people that don't. Whereas if everybody's expected to call foul on each other, then everyone's on an even playing field. And so I tend to not like rules when they're set up to where the people that have integrity are at a disadvantage to people that are willing to cheat. And so I feel like if your goal is to eliminate cheating, then you could maybe set up rules such that cheating is not incentivized and integrity is not punished. And to me, if I could wave a wand, I would. If I could sit there and wave a wand and say everybody would agree with my set of values, the reason that I thought it was cool growing up in a pool room where you had to call foul on your opponent was because it was an even playing field and everybody could act honestly and not be at a disadvantage.
Fair. I know you want to move on, but just because you mentioned that, it's like a perfect thing. So I'm not going to mention any names because I would never call people out for that reason. And I don't think that this maybe would really say it because they might have similar types of views that you do or for different reasoning, whatever it is. There's certain types, or there is certain players, like even in this like Minnesota or few state area that I know for a fact, because I've had a long history of playing in tournaments, that when there is those things where they slow kick at a ball and it's an inch or a half inch off the rail and it's like close to a split hit, that they're always going to error, if you want to put error on the side that's in favor of them, right?
Are some of these people older generation?
Some, well, again, I don't want to narrow it down at all.
Okay.
There's players. Just players that I know that will do this, and I've had it done to me multiple times. Now, definitely when I was younger, when I was still like competing more and I had a lot of like killer instinct. I wanted to be the winner and I cared more about the result. I did always have in the back of my mind that I kept like a tally of this stuff, right? And I knew that I was like, yep, this player's like, I viewed it as like, this player cheated me like 3 times. And I had it in my mind that when I play this player, if a similar situation comes up that's really, truly borderline, and I don't know that I just, there's a 0% chance I'm going to budge, just like, no chance. Like, no chance, didn't foul. If it's close enough, no chance, didn't foul. And then what I realized is like, so I don't want to make this sound like I'm some perfect human being that's like never done this.
But you are, Jesse.
No, far from it. No. This is just, I've learned a lot from personal experience with this. I remember that this situation came up with somebody that did that to me. And I knew that they had done it like plenty of times. I mean, enough to make me like super angry about it. And a situation came up where I shot a shot that I knew it was a very, very high percentage that I probably did not get a good hit, but it was super close, super, super close. And even the people that were watching were kind of like, maybe you could kind of hear him talking about it. And I was just like, I don't know, man, you should have called the ref. And afterwards, I realized, I was like, you know what? That was pretty close, but I didn't feel good because I knew that it was going to probably be close. And I knew that the right thing for me to do at that time, even knowing that the person would have like
cheated me back,
is I should have just I should have made it the super fair route and said, hey, like, I think this has a chance to be close. I want to get somebody to watch it. That's what I do now. is anytime I think there's going to be something close, I'm not going to say especially if they're like a person I know might do like something to side with them. I'll never say, hey, let's both watch it, because I know we can get in an argument. That's where I just want to get the third party to make the call and just accept the result if it's going to be close. But I think you have, like, my whole point is I think you have to go through that and decide for yourself what you think is correct. And just where I land is, I don't care that gives them a slight advantage in those situations, because if they end up winning the tournament and they feel good and like, I mean, great, good for them. If I won a tournament at a hill set that was like to get into the money, and I knew I had just an easy coast from there for a few $1,000s, like, I'm not going to feel great knowing that I cheated that person or borderline cheated them.
Okay, so we're talking about a couple different things. One question you're answering is, in that situation I talked about where there's 50 cheaters, 50 non-cheaters, and we've got the rules set up where by calling foul on ourselves, we've given the cheaters the advantage. You're saying I'm willing to give up that advantage to have my integrity. I am too. So we're in agreement. But the question is,
playing down your basement would say otherwise.
Question. Wow. The question is, should we set the rules up that way? I'm going to give you. So my whole thing is that when I set up rules, okay, and I don't set up rules for pool, I don't run tournaments, but as a parent and as a former manager, I would sometimes have to set up policies or set up rules. I've learned I don't set up rules to be followed. I don't set up rules with the expectation that everyone's going to follow them. That would just be really easy. Like, for example, if in our country we said, you know what, we're going to make alcohol illegal because it would be better if nobody drank. It's like, yeah, but what's not going to happen is everybody's going to be like, okay, that's the new rule. We're all quit drinking. It's like, what's actually going to happen is what happened during Prohibition. There's going to be, the moonshine and the bootleggers and all this stuff. And there's going to be, so then the question isn't, would the world be a better place if we made this rule to quit drinking and everybody quit drinking? The question is, would the world be a better place when we start having organized crime, when we start having to lock up civilians and all this stuff? Like, what's going to happen when we enforce these rules? And I really believe that a lot of tournament directors don't get this, and they make rules because they think people will follow them and it'll be better. But what people don't follow them, and then the way it either rewards cheaters or creates really difficult to enforce. So like a great example of that is pattern racking. Like saying, hey, no pattern racking. But then the problem is that a lot of people pattern rack, and it's really easy to have 3 different patterns that you rotate between and you flip flop symmetrically. And some of these people, now you might think in some matches that might not mean a lot, but if you're playing with a magic rack and if you're playing on a good breaking table, it could be decisive. And I've seen it during ghost matches, during like these virtual isolation tournaments and virtual tournaments and stuff, when people are playing the ghost. The ones that Nate did, we had an assigned pattern, and that solved that problem. So I like that. But I've seen some matches where you're not supposed to pattern rack, where we've seen certain people flip between a few different patterns where nothing can really be proved necessarily. And of course, there's different degrees, right? There's like stuff where it's like, well, I won't use a pattern, but I'll make sure that the 4 ball's never in that row, or I'll make sure that ball's never back there. And so it's anyway, I just look at it. And so one interesting thing at that tournament where you 3-railed that ball in on Shane, that was a CSI tournament, right? And when we were playing the 9-ball and the 10-ball, they had a rule that said no pattern racking. And when we talked to the refs about it, they said, we're not going to have this rule next year. Next year, we're allowing pattern racking, because trying to enforce this was such an awful, awful, awful thing for a tournament. Because if your opponent's pattern racking, what are you going to have a notebook and you're going to keep track of the patterns that they use? And then even if you do, then it's like by the time you have enough sample size to really have any evidence that they're pattern racking, the set's already over, and you don't really have any evidence because all you're going off of is your own recollection at this point. The tournament director's not there to see it. It's like it puts you in an impossible situation to defend yourself. And so some people just pattern rack and have an advantage. And so my whole point is, Jesse, if you say pattern racking is legal, now I understand that for you, it's so hard to consider a world in which you don't call foul on yourself as being anything other than wrong. But let me ask you this. If you played in a tournament where the tournament director had a meeting and said, guys, you can rack the balls whichever pattern you want, you're allowed to pattern rack. Then in that world, would pattern racking be allowed? Is that it, or is that low integrity to pattern rack?
Well, see, now you make a good point, because like specifically at the bar table championships, right? I remember that they had this rule.
Yeah.
And I remember the same thing. Like, I had a rough idea of about 3, maybe 4 patterns that I knew I was going to pretty much do. And the idea was that, I wanted to have the 2 or the next ball after the 1 ball, and then the 8 ball, right before the 9, right? To be in the top 2 balls because of the speed I was going to break them at. And, anyways. So obviously when I needed to move the 2 and I couldn't pattern rack the 2-8
You
up
put
top.
the 2 on the wing, so
Exactly.
it goes in,
And then put the 3-8 up there.
Yeah.
And there was like 3 different patterns where you could pretty much keep it at the same pattern.
Yeah.
But not really, So I mean and like I guess if somebody made an argument and said, well, that's just as bad. I mean, okay, I'm open to the discussion. Like, because to me, like I'm willing to admit fault there. Like, yeah, I mean, like the reason why I would say that like the best way to solve that would be, yeah, like when you go to play a tournament, you should just get a random draw sheet that shows you how you're going to rack the balls each time or for the entire match, both players. That would be the easiest fix for that. And both players either get a really easy pattern or they get a very difficult pattern that they have to break 8 or 9 times to try to run out. And that's life, because that's not an area where I would like say I focused a ton of my energy on, but it's like that's also not as clear cut as the idea that you didn't actually hit the ball before you hit the rail. And absolutely that there's no reason that cue ball shouldn't be picked up and be put in your opponent's hand.
I understand that it's certainly not, well, you say it's not as clear cut. I don't know, man. I think that if they say no pattern racking and you start doing anything other than randomly throwing balls in the rack, then you're doing that. So I don't know that okay. But what I guess I would say is I was trying to use examples of what rules I don't like. And I don't like rules that can't be enforced and rely on players' honor system, because then I feel like you're rewarding players for being dishonest. I'm not saying I wouldn't act honestly, because I try to hold myself to the same standards you do. I would still be one of those players to give up the advantage to act with integrity. And I don't really necessarily care. I don't think that necessarily in most cases it makes that big of a deal. I don't hold the cheaters responsible for their cheating. When I see somebody like do something where it's like kind of unethical, I don't even get mad at the player. I get mad at the tournament director for allowing that even to happen. And so like, for example, like what you're just saying with the rack, so there's a lot of ways to solve this. You could say everybody can pattern rack. You could just post a rack per match. You could do a lot of different things to solve that. But what I don't like is when they just say, don't do it, but that it's impossible to enforce, because then you've got players that do one of 3 different things. You've got one set of players that just randomly throw the balls in. You've got another set of players that kind of mostly randomly throw the balls in, but might make a couple of subtle improvements or have, flip between a few different slightly beneficial patterns. And then you've got people that blatantly just use the same pattern every time, like they're just, asking somebody to pick a fight with them. And so then the problem is that everybody's watching what everybody else is doing. And you've got some people that were randomly throwing all the balls in, but then they played a guy that was using the exact same pattern every time. And then they said something and it couldn't really be enforced, and their opponent was kind of laughing about it. So now they are bitter. And so now they want to start pattern racking. And it's like, we're playing this weird game where everybody's like trying to follow the rules, but then watching each other kind of cheat. And it's trying to figure out what the right, road is for them to be integrity without being a complete sucker, because there are tournaments where that can make a big difference. So it's like, I just think that those are bad rules. And I would rather just see them say, you can pattern rack. And that's what actually they concluded was the CSI, the guys running that were like, next year we're just going to allow people to pattern rack, because this is, forget about, so the point is you can't think about how you'd like the game to be played. You have to think about how, kind of like, you can't make a law saying no alcohol and think about how the world you'd like to live in where nobody drinks. You have to think about how it's going to actually play out. And it's like, you can't just sit there and say, I would like everybody to rack randomly, and I think that's the right way for pool to be played. Great. How is it actually going to play out? And it frustrates me to no end to watch people make these idealistic rules that play out horribly in tournaments and then act like they're surprised. And it's just, it's like, these are the same people that pocket the 1 and then look around to see where the 2 ball is.
Fair. Okay. So you pretty much nailed there when you said like the rules that can't be enforced. So to me, like the idea with the rule of no pattern racking is, it's the same concept as no soft breaking or effort to get force, right?
Like the bachelor break.
Effort to like effort for like a forceful break. Like when you read rules like that, you already roll your eyes because you know that it's just going to be a total joke, right? And then they implement like the 3-point rule, but then there's like the US Open, right? They used to have something where it was like 3-point past the side. Well, if it's a rack your own, you're going to make the wing ball. Otherwise, your opponent can have it. So it's like you're already on a free roll, because if you don't make the wing ball, well, you're going to break try anyways. So it doesn't really matter. And it's so easy to get 2 balls past the side, right? when rules like that are in place, that's a different scenario, and I think that can be handled. That should be like looked at differently. The idea that the rule is that after you contact an object ball, either that ball or the cue ball needs to make contact with a rail. That's very clear cut. Like because if an opponent does that, right? If they just, if they quote poaching and get like a half inch short of the rail and whatever, then your very next shot, right? Because there was no cameras on the table and they just refused to admit that they fouled. Your very next shot, why don't you just like literally tap the cue ball an inch and freeze them on the right behind the 9 ball? And then they're like, well, obviously foul. You didn't even like hit it down the table towards the 1 ball. You'd be like, oh, nope, it got a rail. And I hit the object ball. Like, why not just do that? And like, and then be like, oh, by the way, you're hooked. I'm gonna go call the ref. Like what? I mean, there's a range of like, okay, what's like clearly pushed, over the line there. But when there's a distinct rule in place of like object ball, then that has to hit a rail or whatever, then that's something that you just don't. You just don't like try to cheat that, okay?
Right. So okay.
Advantage play with gray area rules, that's a completely different concept to me.
So I think that there's, again, in every example I gave about your opponents calling foul on you being at their responsibility in every situation, one of the conditions was they asked you kind of have to like tell the truth. Like even when I grew up, that was always the expectation. So I guess that if I could highlight a couple of my main points would be, one, I think that it's about social norms, not about what's right and wrong. I think that things that we consider to be wrong can be right if that's the rules and that's what everybody plays by and everybody agrees to. And I think that things that we consider to be right now, or things that might be wrong in the standards in the future. And then the other thing is that in general, I don't like rules set up where they're awkward to enforce and reward unethical players. I think that those are poor rules. I think rules should be set up to put everyone on a fair ground. And so that was the only thing about having it be your opponent's responsibility to call foul. Now, there was another interesting idea that I had, which is there's a lot of things that kind of come down to like, is it part of the game or not? So like, for example, you're up 2-1 on me. I win a rack. I forget to move my coin. And then I ask you, I said, hey, I thought I was at, I'm sorry. I thought I was at 2. It's 2-2, right? Or if you stared at me and were like, well, all right, it acted like you're uncomfortable with that, or like, would you remind me to move my coin? Kind of, I guess the question is, do you remind your opponent to move their coin if they forget to move their coin? Now, you could sit there, and here's what I'd say is, there's almost like 2 parts. You've got the game that you're playing, that you're fighting about, and then you've got the rules that are outside of that game. So the way I think you and I play is that we'll fight to the death to try to win these games for each other. But if you won the game, you won the game, and I'm going to tell you won the game, because like not letting like in other words, not letting you move your coin or not reminding you that you moved your coin is not part of the game. Now, if you're going to shoot the wrong ball, if you're shooting the 6 ball and the 5 ball is still on the table playing 9 ball, that's part of the game. I might not say, hey, Jesse, you're shooting the wrong ball. Like, that's your responsibility. Would you agree with that? It's your responsibility to shoot the right ball?
Yes.
Okay, so then I might not stop you from shooting the wrong ball because that's part of the game. But if you forget to move your coin, keeping score is not part of the game. That's just keeping score within the game. And so like it's almost like there's a set of rules that apply to the game. And then there's what we do outside of the game that's being battled over. And keeping score, we have a gentleman's agreement that we're going to do our best to help each other maintain a current score while we fight each other within the rules of the game that we are willing to fight about. Right?
Yeah. So there's a specific scenario. Again, I'm not going to mention the name of the opponent, but I know that you were there and saw the scenario play out. I think you remember as I'm talking about, like, I was the person that was keeping the score on the score sheet. And there was a really bad, like, altercation with this, where that person was like more of like an old school type of person. I was just kind of like toss the coins up nonchalant, like whatever, we'll just kind of mark them and whatever. When the score gets tight, we'll figure out whose break it is and change the score. Anyways, it reached a point where I was ahead in the set 5-3, and
I remember now.
It was supposed to be my break. And
oh God, I remember
the person went up to they were gonna rack the balls, and they're like, no, it's my break. And I'm like, no, I broke first, right? And then they're like, yeah, but then they changed it and they were like, but I'm up. They said that they were up 4-3 because the coins on the table were marked that they were up 4-3, which I had never personally moved the coins on the table. That was just how they were sort of keeping their own score. When literally there's a score sheet that we're marking X's on, and I assumed that I was keeping the official mark of the table or of the match, you know. So, anyways, how this worked out is like I was ready to fight this thing to the death, and the person ended up basically trying to make me like seem like the bad guy in the situation, but 100% I was right. There was no chance I didn't have the score correct, and so in that case, like I couldn't let that one go because I knew that I kept the score correctly and the games were won. It had nothing to do with I wanted to have the advantage in the set. It's just that's literally what it was. I can't change the fact that I won 5 games and that person only won 3. And the person was a great player too. But it is what it is, man. Like so in that case, you know, whatever. And if it had that person been ahead 5-3 and only had the coins marked 4-3, and then be like, oh, is it like I went up to rack the balls? They're like, no, it's my break. I'm up 4-3. I'd be like, no, you're up 5-3. I won the flip. That's how I handle that situation. I would never try to be like, oh, I guess you are up 4-3, and like, you know, it's essentially like screw them out of a game. That's not what I'm going to do. So when I'm on the other side of that, I'm ready to fight it to the death.
Right,
that's just
right.
how it is.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I think that the idea is that, you know, it has to do with what you think is within the bounds of the game versus not the game. I think there are some players that would let a game sleep, or that you know, don't let their player or their opponent mark a game as they slept it for a game. Because they consider that like the battlefield. They consider that part of the battlefield. And in poker, you know, I'll just say in poker, they look, and I had a couple other examples, like, you know, raking the balls. You know, it used to be that people used to rake the balls. Nowadays, if people start raking balls on you when you're playing a match, it's like, that's just not done anymore. It used to be done. And it used to be not only was it like it was normal, and it was actually part of the game, was that sometimes you could see this ball, but then you wouldn't concede that ball, and they wonder how good they have to get, or kind of like, you know, sometimes you could kind of be disruptive to their rhythm, or they're, you know, kind of distract them because they're wondering when you're going to start conceding, or how come last time you break 3 balls and now you're making them shoot this 8 ball, and how, you know, why are they making me shoot this money ball? They gave me a tougher one last time, you know. So it used to be some gamesmanship when I grew up with raking balls. But then that was like considered to be bad. We're like, hey, man, we're sharking each other. It's not professional. We should shoot them all. So then they started making it normal to shoot them all. They had those be the rules. There's a 1-game penalty if you start conceding balls. And so now that's become the gentleman's rules. That's become our culture, is that you don't rake balls on each other. But there was, in the 90s, that was totally normal. So it's not that people were cheating back then, but back then that was part of the game that you played, was a raking the ball strategy. You know what I mean? So these are many, many things. And I have other examples. We don't need to look at all of them, but there was like taking breaks on your turn. It used to be, you know, you could take a break on your opponent's turn and kind of, you know, ice them or something before a big game. Now it's like, no, you take a break on your turn because we don't want to be icing other people and all this stuff. And so now when I play people that don't know that and they take a break when it's my turn, I'm always like, it's always like weird. I'm like, man, you don't do that. So my whole point is cultural norms change. And that there's part of the game. It's just like poker, where you have angle shoot. Poker is a game of deception. Of course, it's okay to bluff. Of course, it's okay to, you know, misrepresent your hand strength or play your hand in deceptive lines. But it's not okay to hide your big chips. Like Alec Torelli, what was his name?
Yeah, Alec Torelli.
It's not okay to like, you know, angle shoot where you like, you know, act like you're calling, but then you put enough chips where it's like, oh, I have to raise, or the other way around. You know, there's all these different angle shoots, and it's like there's like etiquette where you're not supposed to say, oh, I haven't looked at my cards yet, and then, you know, you actually have. So it's like there's certain etiquette, even in poker, which is a game of deception. There's still etiquette about what types of deception are allowed and versus what types of deception are off limit. And that's my whole point, is that I just wish people would see that this is, I mean, a lot of people listening are going to be like, well, you're just a cheater. It's like, no, I call foul on myself. That's the standard of today. I just think that 2 things. I think that our norms are what create right or wrong. I don't think that when it comes to pool rules, I think there's a lot of ways to play pool. And that as long as everyone agrees and plays by those rules, the rules can be changed. And as long as everybody agrees and plays by them, that can be right. And that I also think that, in general, I prefer to see those rules set up to where, you know, it doesn't rely on honor systems and hard to enforce. And that's, I would prefer to see rules set up to where it doesn't disadvantage the honest players. But that all being said, in today's day and age, it's a mix. You have some inexperienced tournament directors, you have weird culture and all these things to where sometimes you get in these murky areas, and then we're still going to do the right thing, even if that puts us at a slight occasional disadvantage. I find it fascinating, and so I find it interesting to talk about.
Yeah. Can I make one more point on this topic?
Yep.
Okay. So you're familiar with Turning Stone. You've played in the tournament multiple times.
Yes.
This leads into like one of the strangest rules that I have seen come up in pool. But anyway, so the way that Turning Stone works, for anybody that doesn't know, is, unless it's changed since I last been out there, it's a big table 9-ball tournament, but it's rack for your opponent, correct? Still rack for your opponent. Okay.
Yeah.
So the strangest thing about like racking for your opponent is, obviously, if you're a knowledgeable person, when you lift up that rack, you know if the corner ball is wired or not. And you know if your opponent's knowledgeable, once they come and inspect that rack, they're going to know which side of the table to break from to make that wired ball. So that's a tricky thing too. Like when you go to rack the balls, do you now rack them just a touch higher, knowing that they're going to sit in the place that makes it very difficult, or not? Like there's those, that inner moral system where
and there's pattern racking too, where if you could rack the 2 behind the 9, you're more likely to create up and down movement. Yeah.
So for me, like, I really dislike tournaments like that, because it puts you in such a weird. It's like, then if you rack the balls, like, did you do them wrong because you didn't rack them 6 times until it was absolutely perfect, the exact same way you would rack if you got to break these balls? Like, there's rules in place in tournaments like that make zero sense to me, because it could all be solved by just making it rack your own and making it a very specific rule that you can't rub the ball, or once you like let your fingers off wherever the balls sit, that's how you have to do it, right? Or now they have like the template racks, right? That takes a lot of that. Anyways, so that's one side of that tournament I want to point out. And then this has now become a very common rule in professional level tournaments, where conceding the money ball not only loses you that game, it also costs you another game.
Right.
For me, this has got to be, aside from maybe like when you're on TV, if there's like actual real like sponsorship money involved, and that's something that means something to them, this has got to be one of the dumbest rules I've ever heard of. Like, we went out to that professional tournament out in or whatever you want, like the tournament we went out to in Virginia, right?
Yeah.
My very
It's
first
Aranis Mass A tournament.
Yeah.
Right.
So my very first match that I played, I was ahead on this guy. Like, I think I was up like 7-2, and I mean, no disrespect to him, but at this point in match especially, he just had next to zero chance to win. I mean, I would have had to hang up like a bunch of 10 balls. He just wasn't a capable enough player to beat me from that, being that, far down the set. So what happened is, he was like trying to run out on that game, and he ended up like hanging up the 6 ball, and then I ran 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the 10 ball was like nearly hanging. So he was just like, that's good. And I knew that when he said that's good, that I couldn't take that. I was going to shoot the ball, but that's where he took his tip and knocked the 10 ball down to the other end of the table. Well, I was like, okay, I kind of looked at him and gave I was like, you're really not supposed to concede games, just so you know. That's what I told him. And I had zero intention on taking the extra game. I went down to start racking the balls, and I racked them. And after I lifted up my break cue to kind of walk around the other end of the table, the ref came up and he's like, hey guys, like, the match is over. You can't concede the game. So the ref was the one that came in and forced it, as technically he should have. But for me, I didn't even think that was right, because like, yes, that's a tournament rule, but I didn't want to enforce that. I'm the only person that could benefit from that rule. No, that doesn't affect how the bracket plays out. It doesn't affect any other person's match. It specifically just made it where I got an extra game for free for something that I didn't do work for. And my opponent really didn't make a mistake. He just made the decision that there's no chance I was ever going to miss that 10 ball. And really, it has nothing to do with the spectators at all.
Yeah.
Aside from like, it takes away from an ounce of excitement. But it's just, that rule again has just never made sense to me.
It's one of those rules where I think okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And my other point of that was like, going back to Turning Stone, I know this is something that happened a while back. The year that Billy Thorpe won that tournament, it was like a big thing on AZ, or something popped up on Facebook, where in the semifinal match, he actually lost to the guy because of that rule. He conceded the guy a 9 ball to the guy, and then was supposed to lose the match. Now, luckily for him, the guy had a level of integrity where he's just like, yeah, I'm not going to win the match and go to the finals that way. I believe it was the semifinal. It might have been but anyways, the point is the guy was like, yeah, I'm not going to do it. So even though the rule was that way, he's like, no, like, because from what I understand, it wasn't there, but from what I understand, like Mike Slugg was like, yeah, that's a foul, that's a loss, you lose the match. And the guy was like, nope, I'm not taking it. We're playing the Hill game. So then they played the Hill game, and Billy won, of course. And then the guy shook his hand, went on about it, and like let it happen. Now, that's the way that I think that rule should play out if the rule's even going to be in place, is like at the end of the day, it should be up to the person who only directly benefits from accepting that ridiculous rule in the first place. Because, I mean, it's their tournament life on the line, right? Like, do you see what I'm getting at? Like a tournament director should not be able to come in at that point and be like, well, you conceded. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm going on too much of a tangent.
No. I think
it's just ridiculous, man.
So, okay, a couple of thoughts. One, yes, there's a lot of goofy rules in tournaments and a lot of rules that set up controversy. I think part of the problem with this concession thing is that it doesn't feel okay. So there's a big difference between a guy like getting pissed because he makes the 6 and scratches and they're like angrily raking the 7, 8, 9 in a poor sportsman like way, and a guy that's like, sometimes conceding 2 balls and sometimes conceding 1 ball, rack after rack, like it's some kind of head game, versus a guy who just like makes the 9 and scratches and then like doesn't make you spot it up and shoot it in. You know what I mean? There's a big difference. And so I think we all know the difference between a guy who's like poor sportsmanship, sharky, versus a guy who's just kind of like hung up a 10 ball and just kind of, taps it in with a skew out of disgust. Like we know the difference between like a disruptive concession versus a kind of an innocent concession. And it's hard to want to take a game penalty when the guy makes an innocent concession. And so I get that. But I think part of that too is because these rules have only been around so long. And so we're still kind of like, it's still a little bit weird to us. The other one that this reminds me of is, those 10 ball tournaments where it was, you had to call the money ball. There was like these clips of like, like multiple players, like including Shane, I think, bowed out of the tournament because like they'd get on the hill, they'd be shooting the 10 straight in the side, and they would forget that they had to call the money ball. Even if they're shooting it straight in, they had to like call the pocket. And so like they would shoot the 10 straight in the side, and then the ref would call foul and spot the 10 ball up, and their opponent would gleefully be jumping up and down and shooting the 10 in. And the players that would do this would just get so disgusted that they would just like bow out of the tournament. Like, I don't even want to play against guys that are going to celebrate and take that. Yeah. So it's an awkward spot. All I know is, for me, I actually am a big fan of the no concessions rule. I think that the vast majority of the time people start conceding balls, it's because it's very disrespectful to their opponent. Like, I don't want to sit there and watch you run them out. And I lost this game and you didn't win it. I lost it. And I'm not going to let you sit there and think that you won it. It was, you have to, I gave it to you. So all this, it's just a really negative, bad attitude for the most part. And I think, you know what? It's my tournament. I get to shoot the balls in. When you start raking balls and making concessions, I just think it's poor attitude, and oftentimes it's either a bad attitude or it's deliberate sharking, and I don't like it. And so very, very, very seldom does it get in play, because it doesn't really happen that often because of that rule. So I actually like the rule because I don't like that type of a game. I think people should just, when they miss, they should just suck it up and sit down like them, and take it, and let you run your balls out. And so I like the rule. I think that saying it's your option whether to enforce it, the only problem is if you say it's your option whether to enforce it, then that puts a lot of people in really awkward spots where maybe it becomes awkward and uncomfortable for them to enforce it, because all of a sudden, yeah, it's the rule, but most people don't enforce it. So you're being kind of, you're kind of being a little, snaky by even taking the game. It's like, no. We're just, not only is it the rule, that's the rule. You get the game. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You don't have to be the bad guy for calling it. Like the same way that if somebody kicks and doesn't get a rail, you don't feel bad about taking ball in hand. It's like, you were supposed to hit a rail. You didn't hit a rail. It's not like one of those things, well, you're supposed to hit a rail, but I'm not going to take the cue ball on you this time. And then a lot of people don't take the cue ball there. And then all of a sudden somebody kicks and doesn't get a rail. You pick up the cue ball. They're like, well, I don't understand. Most people are okay with that. What's wrong with you? It's like, no, it's a foul. Don't do it.
Okay. When you put it like that, I mean, then yeah, I would say I don't hate the rule when you put it like that. And to be clear, I don't concede balls when I go to tournaments like that. I mean, if you and I are messing around, or if I'm,
well, I can miss anything. So, there's a very good strategic reason not to concede balls.
Especially if you listen to our first podcast together.
That's correct. You'll know all about that one.
Yeah, I don't do it just because, well, yeah, anything can happen for one. And I let people finish. They're like, because I just don't want to get into any sort of, controversy there. But yeah, I just think that there's my whole point with that specific rule was just that there are rules in place in tournaments that are definitely set up to like make it difficult on the players. And that because when you have stuff that's not clear cut, it's just no good.
I think tournament directors, I think we could say it would be nice if tournament directors were less idealistic about how they hope that things would play out, and that they would instead talk to players and look at other tournaments that have run. What are the controversies, and then talk to the players and get input about like which types of rules are best for both gameplay and for match play, and avoiding confrontation and cheating. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, that was good. So I enjoyed that conversation. I feel good about it. I just wanted to kind of sort through some thoughts that were on my mind after going through that thread. So I think that wraps it. So I'll tell you what, it's been a good pod. So we'll ship it off into cyberspace and see what y'all think. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll keep taking listener questions. Oh, one other thing is, it's possible that Jesse and I might do a live stream at some point where we do some Q&A, and also maybe play like a challenge match against each other while we're doing the Q&A. So that might be coming up. We're trying to, make sure that we've got the right setup to do that, give you guys some notice, so when that's going to be. We didn't want to step on the toes of the Moscowini Cup or anything. So, but anyway, we're going to have some fun, and we appreciate you coming along with us. Until next time, take care, Jesse.
All right. See you later.